and welcome along to the O'Dare Academy in Conversation With. Big shout out to all our listeners on the Actors Toolkit podcast as well. Today we've got something a little bit different for you. We are joined by a really well-known director up in the northeast of Scotland. It's David Ryan Keith. David, how are you doing?
Good, very good, thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for joining us today. So do you want to tell our listeners a little bit about you? Who is David Ryan Keith, and tell us a little bit about your career so far?
Okay, well, I guess I'm mostly known for making low-budget indie movies and trying my best to try and take productions from the US, try and take them to the UK, mainly Scotland. But yeah, we run our own company called Clear Focus Movies up here in Aberdeen, and in between doing like our bread and butter job, which is, if I'm honest, like corporate video, we try and make at least one feature movie up here once every 2 years. So it's been, I think the company's been going now for about 11 years. So it's been a slow grind, because obviously where I'm based in Scotland, which you know, there's not much of a film, well, there is no film industry, so it's
like a creative black hole.
It really is, and then you travel 2 hours down the road, and it's completely different. So we've just been kind of fighting against the grain, and it looks like our days of making movies in Scotland are sadly over. We're gonna jump ship and do the next ones in the US by the sounds of it. So an end of an era for us, I guess.
Well, yeah, that's a shame, but like you say, you got to go where the work is. So, how did Clear Focus come to be? I mean, I know you run it with your wife Lorraine. How did that come to be?
I worked for a small film company in Aberdeen for about 8 years, and they were pretty good because they touched like proper feature movies, like all aspects of video production, film production. But like I started when I was younger doing like a lot of short films, so I was always wanting to make movies, and then being in that company for so long, you kind of, the last thing you want to do in your weekend is make your movies. And it wasn't until I met my future wife where she was like, if you're going to make the jump, to make movies, then we just got to start up by ourselves, take the risk, start with the corporate jobs and see if we can move up to try and make our own movies. So it was, thinking back, I'm like, it's such a stupid thing to do, and somewhat it's paid off, but in looking back, I'm just like, wow, what was I thinking? But yeah, so it was just like a natural progression. You can spend your whole life working for other companies, watching people do the things that you want to do, or take the risk and try it yourself, I guess.
And it seems in many ways the risk paid off. I mean, one of your movies, The Redwood Massacre, it's got like somewhat of a cult following. Where did the idea for that come from?
So The Redwood Massacre, our first movie, it was a comedy horror. And again, at the time, I thought it was a good idea. It was just as the industry was moving from film to digital. So this new kind of camera came out, which kind of tricked people at the time in the States. They were like, well, it doesn't look like a video and it doesn't look like film. So this film ended up getting distribution, and it would never get distribution today, but we got distribution, and we got absolutely, what's a nice word to use, screwed over. Can I say that?
Yeah, that works. Yeah.
So it was a huge lesson on the difference between the creative side of trying to make a movie and ultimately the 80%, which is the business of movies. So after taking that hit, which, I mean, it was pretty painful at the time, we just tried to play their game. So we chose slasher film. We're not chasing an audience. The audience is already there. Horror, low budget, that kind of stuff. And even when we pitched it to the distributors at the time that might have bought it, they were just like, you're wasting your time. No one watches this, does that. So we took the risk to fund the film ourselves. And lo and behold, people do watch slasher films. So it was one of those things, the distributor was like, oh, because at the time we got a great deal. He's like, I'll buy your movie and you can have this deal because it ain't going to make no money. It's not going to do anything. And then lo and behold, boom, it was like a kind of little sleeper hit for an indie movie.
Yeah.
And that's what, that was really what opened the doors to further investment. So yeah, it was, I mean, again, I keep thinking, I can't believe it only cost about £40,000, but at the time, we'd only been 4 years into our business. So really, it was a stupid thing to do, but it did pay off.
Yeah, and I've noticed, like having known you for a good few years, I've noticed that each film you've done has been a progression on from the previous one, which is obviously the way it should be. To the point now that you're about to release I Am Rage, which is your latest one, but you've also switched from the horror genre into more of an action genre. What was the idea behind that?
It's just more what the way the business is working in the VOD DVD world where I like sit basically. Yeah. So it really down to cameras changing, cameras becoming more affordable, more people having access to film equipment. Like when I started back in the day when they were still maybe like most things were still shot on film, it was so expensive. Editing suites were like 100,000. So only a very small select people could really make a movie. Unless you had, like a very rich father or mother, like. Yeah. And so for those 8 years I was working for a film company, most of the people I watched making movies, I was just like, I can't believe they're getting to do this because they don't know what they're doing. And that's what it kind of come down to. So as the camera technology came more available to people, the VOD industry started to get saturated with movies. And the easiest movie to make, the cheapest movie to make is a horror film. So all of a sudden now they're, instead of, like 10,000 horror films at Cannes or the American film market, it's just like endless. So now the horror movies become worthless.
Yeah.
So we did a sequel to Redwood Massacre. And then we kind of found out the hard way that the horror industry is pretty much dead. So when they were trying to pitch another movie, they were like, the action genre is the only one that kind of eliminates a lot of the indie productions because it costs a lot more money to make. So there's less of them, easier to sell, and possibly make more money. So I'd like to say it was a creative choice to do it, but it wasn't. It was just speaking to the distributor, the producers, seeing where the market was, and I went into action.
Yeah, exactly. And what was the experience of shooting it like? Because obviously you had to deal with things like fight choreography and stunts and things. Was it a totally different experience to previous films?
In a way, it's the same. Like the formula of making movies for me is the same, but I would say the I Am Rage film it's probably the hardest film I've ever made, mostly down to like problems with all these movies are rushed. So as soon as they get the money, they're like, right, we have to film right now because they're scared they might lose the money to another project that might sound better. So as soon as my producers sniff some money, they just whack it. And sometimes it's like 2 months from writing a script to shooting, sometimes less than 2 months. But the big problem with I Am Rage was we thought we'd done everything right. We hired a proper stunt coordinator from Los Angeles that's worked on Hollywood movies, and we thought we put the money in the right places, but then they wanted to film in winter in Scotland.
I came to visit you on set one day and it was sunny, but it was snowing at the same time, and it just didn't.
And it was crazy. I mean, there was days where, well, you saw the forest. Some days would turn up and it was just pure white snow.
Yeah.
And
a nightmare for continuity. And
we've got 18. It's always 18 days to shoot these movies, and it's so tight that even missing an hour it has such a devastating effect on how much time you get to film scenes. So I think we lost like 3 days off of I Am Rage just through weather, and for the cast and crew, rain, snow, hail, sun, rain. You know, it was quite a what's the word, demoralizing process.
And of course, you've got the other challenges, like actors not being able to do stunts in bad weather. You know, there's only so many things you can shoot in a day.
Well, that's the thing. They had the stunt coordinator in the I Am Rage movie. There was like a 5-minute fight scene at the end, and they were like practicing. We had 6 days before we shot the movie, and they were learning it at nights. And of course, when we come to shoot, it's all boggy. It's raining. So it was really hard on the cast, I think. Well, I know. It was a tough slog, and I mean, even at the end, they wanted to do a day of reshoots, and I was just begging for the movie to be finished. So, yeah, it was an experience. But as far as action goes, it's quite similar. We had 2 cameras. The stunt coordinator was brilliant, so it was all like martial arts. So technically, it was quite easy to shoot. It's just the grind of dealing with producers that envision something differently, and the weather and the time, which always makes these indie movies sometimes a nightmare to shoot.
Yeah, but also an experience to look back on. So how is, when you're directing, how do you like to direct actors? Do you like to be quite specific about, you know, what you're asking them to do, or do you kind of like to leave them to their own devices? What's your sort of style?
Well, you know, I'm of the mind of, and I got this confirmed later on when I worked with Danielle Harris that was in the old Halloween movies. My thing is, I can't act, so I don't feel comfortable telling people how they should act. So most of my stuff is just blocking out scenes, telling, you know, where specific marks or camera positions are going to take place, and really letting the actors do what we're paying them to do.
Yeah.
And for a while, people would not criticize me, but be like, oh, well, you're not really an actor's director. And I was like, oh, maybe I should spend more time with the actors. But it wasn't until I was working with Danielle where I dared try to direct her. She just politely reminded me, you know, I've done 1 million films. I've done this a lot of times. This is why you're hiring me. I know exactly what to do. And I was like, yes, you're right. You know, so I'm all for letting actors change dialogue, change movements, anything that I think, you know, will improve the scenes we're shooting. And for me, that has worked perfectly on the last maybe 3 movies. So,
it's good stuff. Of course, you had a cracking cast for I Am Rage, 4 Rodair clients in there. So yeah, we were very, very lucky. How is it working with your wife? There's the question. So of course, Lorraine does a lot of the sort of producing when you're doing your movies. How is it working with your wife?
I like it. I mean, a lot of people might think that it would be a nightmare working with your wife, and it can be a nightmare. But for me, Lorraine is my like last line of defense. So even when when it gets crazy, and I know I've got like my own backup, because when you make indie movies, and I can imagine when it's bigger movies, you have all these other people with invested interests financially, but also their vision of the movie. And this is where things get very difficult, because when you direct a film, there can only really be one. Otherwise, it just gets pulled apart. So Lorraine, for me, is the buffer, you know, that's absorbing the rubbish that can really slow you down or hinder you when you're making a movie, when you don't have time. So she's invaluable for me in that sense. And of course, she produces the movies and organizes pretty much everything, is involved in the casting. In fact, she found some guys from your agency and all that kind of stuff. So
yeah, she's formidable when it comes to the organization side, definitely.
Yeah. I mean, I Am Rage nearly broke her. That's the closest I've seen her to being like, this is out of control.
Yeah, I even noticed it myself, because the emails I was getting from her at the start of the process were all really like bubbly and funny, and by the end it was like, no, not this one, next one. It was very to the point. I don't know if it's only in my experience, but it's just independent films are just so rushed. They're just so rushed. Even when it comes to casting, it's a bit like I find the casting the
the weirdest part, because it becomes almost like the X Factor, where you're just receiving all these reels and all this kind of stuff, and you're, you know what I mean? You're like, next. You don't really get the time to really absorb or watch who they are, because you're under so much pressure to just cast. So yeah,
because in a lot of your movies you've used people who you've known, you know, either from Aberdeen or close friends and things. Is that for that reason? Is that you just know them better than a sort of blanket suggestion?
I think our first two movies we used like friends or the best actors we could, and then I can't remember which movie it was. It was like Los Angeles casting, so I can't remember which film, but that was my first taste of like Hollywood casting, I guess, the way they present it to productions. And I was just like, so bizarre and so impersonal. And it actually made me feel so sorry for actors, because it's just brutal the way they're chosen, and probably not very fair in a weird way. It's just like, I guess it's like picking a DVD movie. Is the poster look good? And then you watch the trailer next. So it's I find it very bizarre.
Yeah, it's very hard. But I mean, the main problem with the industry is it's just so diluted. There's so many actors out there to choose from.
Like so I think for the Redwood Massacre 2, there must have been like 200 people that read for the part.
Yeah.
And it's just a little overwhelming sometimes to try and appreciate what they're doing, because they've obviously spent time, you know, doing this and that, and then you're just like, nope. It's
exactly. And to take the risk as well, because it is a risk, because you can watch somebody in an audition and think, oh, great, but then you don't actually know how they're going to look on camera, how they're going to turn out during the actual filming process.
Yeah, I like the way they do it in Los Angeles, because it's always good sound, normally always against a white background. And the ones we get mostly over here in the UK, it'll be just someone like on their phone, and you can't really see them, or the audio is bad, and you're like, so. But that's
like you say, things are so cheap nowadays. It is, you know, you can get a really good result on a budget.
Yeah.
So there's really no excuse for it.
I think it's true for me anyway. When I hear good sound and the picture's good and you can really see someone, it makes a huge difference, especially when you're going through people so quickly. And then it's on a mobile phone, and you're like, and they might be the best actor ever, but it's just like a bizarre first impression that you kind of sadly might move past them. I know that sounds terrible, but
but then I suppose that's the choice of the actor, to put a little bit more time and effort into the taping process.
I guess. I mean, I've never really asked actors about the cast, like what the actual process they go through to get it on. Like, I know one of your guys, they can like put the script on their phone now, can they? So it's like auto cue.
So you can read it through the camera.
Right.
Yeah, makes it a lot easier. So you started out obviously in the indie world. It's still mostly working in the indie world. How difficult was it to catch a break? Because as you were saying, you know, everything in LA is sort of focused on the bigger projects. You know, how difficult was it for you to get noticed?
I think we kind of got noticed with our first film. Our first film was terrible. It shouldn't have been this.
I actually saw it and it wasn't terrible. It was really funny, but I could see that it was done on a budget.
Yeah. So we kind of tricked everyone, and in a weird way it worked. It sold around the world, but obviously once it hit a general audience that buys a film, it's not going to go down too well. You've just spent like $6 or whatever, and you're like, what is this? Like low budget.
So this is the Attack of the Herbals.
Yeah,
the one we're talking about. Yeah.
So after that, we tried to go through like Scottish Screen at the time, and they obviously the title Attack the Herbals, then you read the synopsis and they're just like, is this a joke? So trying to set anything up through them was just a non-starter, which they're all into more artistic, I guess, Scottish-led productions. And so when we self-financed the Redwood Massacre, the the key to opening the doors was Redwood Massacre made someone else money. That's when the doors opened, because now they're like, oh, well, maybe I can make more money if I give them for their next film. And that was the key. And of course, before that, no one will give you money unless you've made a, they're like, well, I'm not going to invest my money in you because you haven't made a feature film.
Yeah.
Well, how do I get to make a feature film? Well, I don't know. That's why we had to do Redwood Massacre. So it's like a catch-22, a loop that I can imagine filmmakers are trapped in maybe forever if you don't just get that lucky break, the right person, right time. And like, we kind of cheated because we went slasher or horror, you know what I mean? So we kind of, it was a calculated road in.
Yeah, well, it's about knowing the market, isn't it? I suppose, as it is with any business. So, was getting distribution for the movies, was that quite difficult, or have you kind of worked with the same people on all of them?
I'm trying to think. So after Attack of the Herbals, we changed distributors because and it's sad to say, but the whole system's designed to take advantage of first-time director filmmakers, basically. So I remember when we got the contract. And back then, you could send it to Creative Scotland or Scottish Screen, whatever they were, and they would let a lawyer look at it for free. You got like one go at it, and he looked at it, and he's just like, "This is one of the worst contracts I've ever seen." But it's literally the standard contract for first-time filmmakers, so they're going to rip you off. They're going to do this and that, but who else is going to take your movie?
Yeah.
So after that, it was actually Lorraine that actually started studying the way the contracts were put together, and we could start picking out the loopholes that they use to exploit filmmakers. And when we did the Redwood Massacre, we just went through their contracts and changed it all, and they were like, okay. And then later on, as we got to know the distributor, he's like, yeah, well, yeah, we're happy to change it, but we're also happy for you to sign the bad version as well if you don't know what you're looking for. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So it's like a weird game.
So it's like they'll let you make your own mistakes.
They'll let you make your mistakes and take you for whatever you've got. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So once you start learning the ins and out of that, and luckily for us, we've stayed with the same distributor for 5 movies now, and we know him quite well, and he's honest. And I still hear, like, I have a friend just made a movie and he's going through an absolute nightmare with distributor in the UK. And so in a way, I'm like kind of lucky. We've found someone that's easy to go, it's honest. Well, basically honest. Yeah.
And wants to keep working with you as well, which is always handy. Yeah.
Yeah. As long as the movies make money, they'll probably keep giving me money. But even on I Am Rage, one of the executive producers, he funded the Redwood Massacre 2, which didn't do very well. So when his first words as he stepped off the plane to me where it was, and I quote, "If this movie fails, you're finished."
In a big Hollywood way. You'll never work in this town again.
So I was just like, oh, nice to meet you. But in a sense, he's right. And he's like, I'm in the business of making money from movies, and if your movies can't make money, I'm going to move on to someone that does. So you're only really as good as your last movie. So my last movie is I Am Rage, so my fingers are crossed. This movie makes money. So,
well, I've seen the trailer for I Am Rage and it looks amazing, so I have no doubt that it's going to do very, very well. Yeah, on to what has been your favorite movie to shoot? So obviously you've had Attack of the Herbals, Redwood Massacre, Ghosts of Darkness. What's been your favorite one to shoot so far?
I think it was probably the one with Danielle Harris, just because for me, I knew her. She's quite famous in the horror circle. Probably today most people wouldn't know who she is, but she's been in a lot of big movies, and the cast we got for that was exactly the cast well, first of all, I was surprised she said yes. Let's get that straight on. I was like, she's never going to do this. But all of the other people were exactly the people. It was the first time we really thought about casting And then when we got the people we wanted, I was like, wow, we're halfway there. We really believe this is half the battle. The cast is good.
Mhm.
And it was a nice shoot. It was a good shoot. It was a stressful shoot, but there was just an overall feeling, oh, we're moving up now, we're going somewhere. So that's probably my favorite film.
Yeah. Cool.
But again, obviously the film failed, so it's one of those things. But
yeah, well, I mean, that is what it is. What would be the best piece of advice that you could offer to actors? So obviously the Order Academy is aimed at actors. From a director's point of view, what would be the best bit of advice that you could add? Obviously we touched on the self-taping thing, make sure your self-tapes are up to scratch.
I think it's really important. And I did sound for another film, and this guy's been acting for a long time, and he just had no sense of sound recording. Like, he would like to whisper, and that's all good. That's fine, but you're probably gonna have to come back and do ADR and screw the guy doing the editing. So like, most of my advice to actors is really understand how blocking works out, how marks, what your marks are, and probably learn the different types of lenses. It could save you a lot of time in your performance if you understand the lens choice someone's using. And like, most of the Danielle or the other guys from Los Angeles and the Red Room Massacre knew every single focal length, and we'd adapt their performance depending on what lens we're using. And for me, that was just, you know what I mean? I'm like even on I Am Rage, sometimes people will be doing stuff that's not even in frame. And it's something, obviously, you learn quickly, but it's something I think so important to learn the mechanics, I guess, of how the cameras are working.
Yeah, no, that's a cracking piece of advice, because it's something that they just don't teach you, when you
they don't.
training as an actor.
And I think years ago, Ewan McGregor wanted to set up something in Scotland, and it was basically just for that actual movie acting, why you hit your mark, the difference in the depth of field of focus and that kind of stuff. Because when he went into it, it was kind of blind. People are like, what do you mean hit your mark? Why can't I move 1 inch forward? It's like, so it is. I think it would be, it's invaluable.
Well, there you go. That might be a new,
yeah, there you go.
I was just saying, it might be a new course for the Oder Academy to run.
I honestly think so, because you'd be surprised how many people don't understand it, or great actors, or like the guy with the sound. You're kind of shooting yourself in the foot. You might do the best performance you've ever done in the world, but if you're past your mark and you're out of focus, it's pointless.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. So would you recommend indie filmmaking to everybody? I mean, one of the sort of old adages in this industry is, if nobody's giving you work, then make it yourself. Would you recommend would you recommend indie filmmaking to everyone?
I don't know. It's a tough one, because it's so saturated now with indie movies. Even if you make a good indie film, there's no guarantee it's even going to make money or be seen. There's just so many movies getting made, and I don't know how to answer that one, to be honest. It's obviously people that want to make movies or act in movies, you're going to do it regardless, because you love doing this. But as a career, half of me always thinks it would be best. Like, I think acting is a good career. It's a tough one. But for people making indie movies, sometimes I'm always like, why don't you do sound? You'll go and get like 100 jobs a year doing sound. If you want to be a director, you better prepare for the cold times ahead.
Yeah, definitely.
You don't know what's going to come your way, if something's going to work, or it isn't. So it's, I guess, in a weird way, it's like acting, isn't it? It's potluck.
Yes, being in the right place at the right time and getting the right idea. Yeah,
that's why.
Which takes us on to the last question. If you could change one thing about the industry, what would it be and why? We ask this question to everyone that comes on the podcast, and we've never had the same answer twice. So
Well, I guess for me, looking back at some of the, I'll say the more professional things I worked on before I did my indie movies, because for me, when I do the indie, I find it hilarious because it's, for me, I'm just like kind of laugh at it because it's so stupid in a weird way. You know, I'm looking at people pretending to like shoot each other with their guns, pew pew. But so I like find it quite fun. But one of the ones I hated when I worked in the actual industry is how stiff it was, how, especially in the UK, how serious. Sorry, Jim.
That's right.
How serious it was.
Mm-hmm.
Like it was just overly serious for something I thought should be fun, because it is fun, and the way the crews are broken down, and like, or the way the unions, and I don't know, there's just something very, and I understand maybe when you're making big movies that cost millions of dollars, but even then there's something fun about making movies, and a lot of the joy is sucked out of it because people are just so serious about this kind of industry. So I guess if that would be my only change, just people to lighten up. We're making movies.
Yeah.
You know, it should be fun.
Yeah, good advice. Great advice. Well, David, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thanks so much for joining us. And best of luck with whatever happens. If the next one moves out to America, I want a private flight out to come and do the casting.
Will do.
Excellent. Have a good one, David. Cheers.
Thanks.